In a world plagued by power creep, one man stands above the rest. Our general presses forward with his head held high, screaming into the void, "I am Mid-Yuan no more." Alright, so this is going to be part 4 in what I like to call the Jing Yuan saga. Way back in the day, before Jing Yuan ever even released in the game, I told players not to pull Jing Yuan, basically, right? This was very early on in the Honkai Star Rail days when we didn't really have a whole lot of pull power, and we didn't really need Jing Yuan. That's always, unfortunately, been the sad part of Jing Yuan, is that there's always been a better option. Even right now, right? The best time that he ever had was on launch, but it was a very short-lived time because we already knew we had Serval in the game, and we already knew Kafka was going to be coming out in the game. The first thing you ever see when you boot up Honkai Star Rail for the first time is Kafka, and you play her in the tutorial, a lightning-based character with an AoE ultimate and a blast damage skill. You guys understand what I'm getting at, right? He just never really had the juice. He got better over time through relic releases and other character releases, and in my opinion, got more and more relevant as time went on. But on launch, a lot of people were disappointed with his performance. Some people were even skipping Sela because they thought Jing Yuan was going to be so good, right? Unfortunately, some players, believe it or not, quit the game during 1.0 because they were so disappointed that they skipped Sela for Jing Yuan, despite the fact that that might have been his most glorious moment he's ever had. But again, the sad thing is, when you're just starting out, when everyone's in 1.0, you don't have a lot of pull power, and there's just better options that you could have spent your Jade on at the time, right? We all knew he'd eventually get a rerun, and that's probably when he'd be more relevant. Which brings me to part 2. I have to talk about this one first before we get to part 3, where Jing Yuan was a lot better. Part 2 of the Jing Yuan saga is when Kafka released. I put out a video basically clickbaiting. I knew what I was doing, okay? Jing Yuan is bad, right? Obviously, he's never been bad, right? This was around the time of Mid-Yuan, right? I think Mr. Pokey even got some heat, or actually, he got way more heat, right? He got a ton of heat from the Jing Yuan mains subreddit, right? He got a ton of heat for this, and I got heat for putting out my video too, but like 19 seconds into my video, I told people it was clickbait and I was just joking around, and I went on to explain that this was going to happen the whole time. He was never going to be a top-level player or top-level character. He just couldn't. But we knew this going into it the whole time, right? Jing Yuan was never going to be a top-level character at the time. Kafka was going to end up being more relevant than him in the meta when she released, and she only released in like, what was that, 1.2? Dude, that took no time at all for him to be non-relevant amongst 5-star characters. And people back then did calcs and, tested out E6 Serval, and in some cases, E6 Serval was actually outperforming Jing Yuan, a 5-star character. Yeah, that's not in most cases. Jing Yuan was better overall on average, but given the right circumstances, Serval could actually be better in some environments, in some gameplay. So yeah, I was farming a little bit with the second video, but let's move on because, that's all in the past now. I was kidding around and some people didn't realize I was kidding around, but it's whatever. Part 3 is when things really started to kick off for Jing Yuan. This is when Sparkle came out. This was 2.0, okay? I put this video out to basically say Jing Yuan was Mid-Yuan no more, okay? And for a small channel like mine, this video actually kind of did pretty well, right? And that's because a lot of people were really interested and happy to see Jing Yuan do better, whether they liked the guy or not, whether they were still into the Mid-Yuan meme or not. By this time, he got certain relic sets that made him better. He had a lot of character synergy with a bunch of characters. People had a lot of time to play test him and work on his best teams, etc., etc. Plus, it was fun content for a lot of us to try to make good content around Jing Yuan because everyone kind of called him mid, and it was fun to sort of prove them wrong, right? But it was still goofy. Guys, the mid Yuan thing was all jokes, right? He was never top tier, but he was never bad, right? People just need to understand that. That was all the way back in 2.0, right? Dude, we're in 3.0 now, okay? Things have changed since Sparkle released in 2.0. Robin came out in the game, which is currently his second best support, bro. Action advancing the entire team, and he really benefits off of that because he needs a ton of energy. More actions means more energy at the end of the day, plus all the buffs he gets, plus all the action advance for the rest of the team so that they can help the Jing Yuan as well. You have a character like Sunday, who's his new literal best pairing you could have. The best character you can pair with Jing Yuan is Sunday. It's obvious, right? He's a summoner buffer, you know what I mean? And Jing Yuan has the most powerful summon in the game right now, right? He was the first summon in the entire game, right? With the Lightning Lord. But he's a main DPS character, unlike Topaz, who's a sub DPS, or RMC, who's like a support, right? So he gets the most damage output off of it. So a character like Sunday, they synergize very, very well together. Not only that, but we're in Amphorius now, where the meta is shifting out of breaks and out of follow-up into things such as Erudition and, the Remembrance and, some stuff in the second half of Amphorius, but I can't really talk about that right now. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, do some research of your own. But currently, Erudition is going to be very powerful for a long time going forward. And guess what? Jing Yuan, our general, is a Erudition king. He's been for a long time. And I think it's very important to discuss this type of stuff because, again, I think I mentioned this earlier in the video, he's a 1.0 character, dog. Okay? He's a very rare situation in Honkai's Star Rail where he's actually reverse power creep. He's only gotten, better over time, right? Sure, when Sparkle introduced into the game, we hadn't seen Acheron yet, you know what I mean? We hadn't seen certain characters like Fei Xiao that are, two very, very strong top-tier characters, you know what I'm saying? So before that happened, Jing Yuan, he was feeling pretty good after Sparkle released, which used to be one of the best characters you could pair with him. Nowadays, it looks really, really good for Jing Yuan and going forward into the future, at least for a while. But that's another thing I want to get into here. One of the problems that Jing Yuan has always had, it has always existed, is that unfortunately, there's just always been somebody better, right? When he launched, right, he wasn't top tier, Sela was better, right? Dude, Serval could outperform him in certain scenarios. Kafka, literally, some people called it power creep, and it's bro, that's a DOT character. Back in the day, you could run her as a crit character. It was actually viable. It's not viable anymore, but you could have back then. And even though she was a DOT character, you could run her as a crit character, and she would still outperform him. And they're all the characters I'm mentioning right now, they're lightning characters, right? Even in a AoE situation, Kafka would still outperform. It was just kind of crazy, you know what I mean? And the unfortunate thing, when I made the Jing Yuan is mid Yuan no more video, and I told people this in that video, despite him being a lot better, and he is he at the time, by the way, think about this. When I made that video in 2.0, he was the best lightning character out at the time when that video went out. But that's changed, right? And I said this back then, that Acheron was going to come out. And we all knew that Acheron was going to come out. She was revealed before we even got 2.0, and she released in 2.2, right? So unfortunately, there's just always been a better option than Jing Yuan. Even back in 2.0, despite the buffs that we got from other characters, he wasn't a top tier even then. And even now, he's not a top tier. He just has too much competition, despite the fact that things are very, very heavily catering to him right now. We'll see if potentially we get some more, support characters in the coming patches that maybe give him some more buffs and maybe he gets even stronger. But that is something I did want to point out, is that's the one issue with Jing Yuan he's always had. He's never been bad. He's never been Omega great either. He's never been a top tier, but he's never technically actually been really bad or anything like that. Sure, the mid-Yuan jokes are funny, but come on, bro. Even during the mid-Yuan era, he could still clear. It was not a problem clearing with him. He just wasn't the best and never technically was. So don't feel like you made a bad decision if you pulled Jing Yuan in 1.0. I still stand by what I said. You know what I'm saying? If you skipped Sela for Jing Yuan and then, like, you know, you don't have a lot of pulls left, you're maybe pulling, what, you have to maybe skip Silverwolf after. If you're free to play and you're more casual, then who's the next character you might get? You might get Locha if you're lucky. If not, you might get Blade. Imagine having pulled Jing Yuan and Blade as your first two premium characters, dog. Like, no offense, like they were fine on their launch, but then they kind of fall off pretty quick. Dan Heng and Bibertu Lune came out right after that. Jing Liu came out right after that. And I'm not sitting here saying skip everything until like the top tier of that arc comes out. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying pull Sela. Like, you should have pulled Sela on launch, use her until like 2.0, because people always like to talk shit, right? But Sela was relevant in the meta basically all the way until 2.2 when Acheron came out, because by then there was just too many top tier DPSs in the way of her being relevant again. She was still usable, you could still clear with her, but she just didn't have the juice anymore. By the time that finally happened to Sela, that's around the time that Jing Yuan became relevant in the meta again, right? He fell off like basically immediately, and then he only rose up again in the meta when Sparkle pretty much came out, right? Because that gave him something he really needed, a strong action advanced character that gives him a bunch of crit, which he really needed, and also made the team more skill point efficient because, like, again, she's literally the skill point fixer, you know what I'm saying? So that fixed him, and she is still, by the way, Sparkle's still one of his best supports. It's just not his best right now, right? But, like, just wanted to point that out, that, like, no, you're not dumb for having pulled him in 1.0, especially because you couldn't have possibly seen it coming unless you saw a video like the one I made. But, you know what I mean? Like, don't feel bad if you skipped him either, because just like I had said all the way back then, you want to pull him on the rerun, and it's one of the only characters you might want to pull on a rerun. There's not that many characters that, like, if you had skipped, might be worth the pull on the rerun. We're talking about usually a support character, like maybe Ron May, or, you know, Robin, or maybe a sub DPS like Topaz, or there's a reason why Topaz had such a fast rerun so quick after, like, she had a rerun, and then only like a couple of patches later, she had another rerun. That's really rare. You know what I'm saying? That's really rare, you know? So there's exceptions to the rerun rule of, like, I usually tell people, don't pull on a rerun, get the new stuff. Don't pull on a rerun, get the new stuff. There are some exceptions to this, and I think Jing Yuan is a very rare case where his rerun back before 2.0 came out, that was actually a good rerun choice back then, because one thing to remember, we got Dr. Ratio for free around that time. That was a great time to save because he was meta relevant, and you had a lot of Jade saved up as a result of not even thinking about pulling during his banner, because, bro, you didn't have to pull him. You didn't have to. And in Cruising in the Stellar Sea was a perfectly good light cone. You didn't actually have to get his light cone either. So it was a great time to pull a character like Jing Yuan if you happen to have the Jade lying around. It was a great time for him. So yeah, because the stars basically aligned for Jing Yuan's first rerun all the way back in around the 2.0 era, yeah, he might have been like one of the only exceptions to where a DPS rerun pull might have actually been potentially worth it. Right? Maybe Acheron's a good choice because it doesn't matter what the meta decides to do, she somehow finds a way of still working out. You know, maybe Firefly got a lot of favoritism, so even though we're moving away from breaks right now, because we're going to an erudition like meta right now, she will still have her moments to shine because she's a destruction character. Hitting multiple enemies at once is going to be a very strong part of the meta going forward in the immediate future, so she'll still be relevant, but, you know, there's very rare exceptions to that, you know what I'm saying? Even Fei Xiao, it's a bit questionable right now if Fei Xiao is worth a rerun pull, because, bro, we're moving towards an erudition character, or sorry, an erudition meta. That's the exact opposite of what Fei Xiao does. Will she still be strong? Sure, of course. She's got her ultimate basically says, I don't care, I still do stuff. You know what I'm saying? She's still going to be relevant, but she might not feel as good as maybe an Acheron rerun pull or something like that. You know what I'm saying? And even now, like, you know, one day Acheron might not be worth the rerun anymore. But let's say Acheron's first rerun, yeah, that's a good choice. You know, Firefly's first rerun, yeah, that's fine. Jing Yuan's first rerun, yeah. Even the second rerun for Jing Yuan, that's not a bad choice if you have the Jade lying around. So a very rare character that has actually managed to survive and be relevant longer than any other character has in the game. And, you know, erudition meta is so strong right now that you actually see a character like Himiko, hello, a standard banner 1.05 star, holy crap, actually doing really, really well. But let's be honest, Jing Yuan's just going to outperform in the current meta as it stands right now at E0, you know, because that's what we measure these characters off of. Maybe you have like a E6 Himiko, and maybe because of that crazy E6 where her ultimate gets to pop off an extra 2 times, yeah, maybe she can actually keep up with Jing Yuan or even outperform him at E6, but that's not what most people play with. Most people play with a 5-star E0. That's the most relevant thing you could really bring up. So yeah, Jing Yuan is a very, very rare case where no, he's not actually technically proof that Powercreep doesn't exist in Honkai Star Rail, right? It still exists, but he's a very rare case where he's kind of like reverse Powercreep. He's had the biggest comeback out of any character in the game right now. I think we'll see Kafka probably have a very big comeback, or maybe Black Swan or something like that once DOT becomes relevant again. That will be, you know, an interesting narrative to have of who's had the biggest comeback once that comes around. But as it stands right now, Jing Yuan is the comeback king, all right? Maybe we'll have to see what happens in part 5 of the Jing Yuan saga to see if he falls off or if he manages to do this all over again someday. Anyways, if he's your general, if you like this kind of stuff, consider leaving a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.